Singing cab driver. Okay, so a little backstory first. I lived in Thailand from ages 13 to 17 as a missionary kid. My parents never really let me travel by myself unless it was necessary. We didn't have a car or anything, so I would use public transportation. Now, being a young blonde white girl in Bangkok, Thailand, where sex trafficking is very prominent, I usually wasn't traveling by myself anyways. And on this particular occasion, I was out at a mall with some friends and was going to go home. It was around dusk, and I was going to take a taxi. Now, I've taken taxis before and haven't had any weird experiences until this time. When I get inside, the guy was asking me questions like where I'm from, what do my parents do. They usually ask these sort of things because I speak the language a bit, and they're curious like anyone else would be. But this guy starts asking me very personal questions like how old I am, do I have a boyfriend, and are your parents home? I immediately started to become very uncomfortable. I give him a false name and age and saying that my parents were home. This is not where it stops. He continues to ask questions, now smiling creepily at me in the rear-view mirror. I start to ignore him and just look out the window. After a minute of silence, he starts to hum, not just humming to himself, but staring at me from the mirror. I wait a couple minutes and have my phone in my hand, ready to call someone if he makes a different turn. I knew most of the paths to my house, so I would know if he was taking a wrong turn. I also start memorizing his taxi number's color and what his face looked like. He eventually starts full-on singing to me a slow song that I could not understand. I finally call my parents and just say to stay on the phone with me. The guy realizes I'm on the phone and stops immediately, and doesn't look at me for the rest of the trip. I told him to drop me off a block away from my house, just so he wouldn't know where I lived. I've never gone out of the cab so fast. I realize he could have been harmless and not intending to be creepy with his singing to me, but it was weird, and I wasn't going to take any chances. I've had one other creepy encounter with a taxi since that time, but that story is for another post. Anyways, creepy singing cab driver, let's not meet again. Bangkok taxi ride. I just remembered I have another story. For my friend's 21st, I bought her a return ticket to Thailand and we went together. I'd been 3 times before, once by myself. I was 19 years old at the time, so I knew what it was like and what not to do. Pretty straightforward. I figured being with a friend would be safer, so we decided to go out at night to the night markets. Once we'd seen it all, we needed to go back. It was about a 10 to 15 minute drive from our hotel, so we decided to hail a cab. We've been told not to get into a taxi that doesn't put the meter on, but this one dude seemed harmless, so we decided to get in anyways. He starts driving and gets to an intersection and then starts driving in the opposite direction of our hotel, like speeding 80 kilometers per hour. We told him to stop countless times, but he did not. We were screaming, but he wouldn't stop and told us this way's quicker. I don't know if you guys have ever been in a situation where you're prepared to die, but we were. We started to open the car doors as he was speeding over a bridge. We probably would have died, but we figured it would be a better, quicker death than whatever he was planning to do to us. It was only once we undid our seatbelts and opened the car doors that he quickly pulled over and kicked us out. We wandered the streets of Bangkok for about 20 minutes before deciding to catch another cab, and eventually, we made it back. Dodgy Thai guy. Not as creepy as many of the other stories on here, but it scared the shit out of me. My girlfriend and I are currently traveling Thailand, and this only happened a few days ago. Where we were staying is a very quiet seaside town with a very few tourists. The view and tranquility make up for the looks we receive from nearly everyone we pass. We had made our way from Koh Phangan to this town, which took us approximately 10 hours by ferry and train. It was about 11 p.m. by the time we arrived at our resort, and nobody was around, so we couldn't check in. This place has a clubhouse, which is basically an open bar with tables, chairs, and one hammock. We decide we'd have to wait here until the morning, as the whole town is deserted after 10 p.m. This resort is known as a garden resort, but to us, Farangs, it's basically in the jungle. My girlfriend slept in the hammock, and I stayed up as I find it almost impossible to sleep in anything other than a bed. It was about 5:30 a.m. when I decided to wake up my girlfriend and suggest we walk to the 7-Eleven to get some water and sit on the beach to watch the sunrise. We get the water and find a bench to sit on and wait for the sun to come up. No more than 5 minutes have passed when we notice a guy on a bicycle slowly pedal past us, watching us the whole time. He then stops abruptly, turns around, and then cyclebacks towards us. He leans his bike up against the sign and quite clearly looked either side of the road for any witnesses. By now, I'm on alert, and luckily I had my machete in my drawstring bag. Satisfied there were no witnesses, he strolls casually towards us. He looked like a junkie, so I was fairly certain that I knew what his intentions were. When he was close enough, I said hello in Thai, but he only responded with a very sly grin and kept walking towards us. When I got to the point that he was going to be behind me, I turned and walked backwards with my hand on the machete handle, but the blade still being covered by the bag. Luckily, I think he saw this and it made him hesitate. He had a fishing jacket on with 2 huge pockets on either side, and he would not take his right hand out of his pocket the whole time, leading me to believe that he had a small blade in there. By now, there was enough distance between us so that if he did try anything, I would have been able to pull out the machete and bury it into his skull. I told my girlfriend to collect our stuff, and we walked down the roads towards our resort, with him looking at us the whole time, probably cursing his missed opportunity. Now, what dawned on me afterwards was the fact of how close I had come to pulling the machete out and actually confronting this guy. Thank fuck I didn't, because I have been told numerous times that many of the police here are corrupt, and even if that junkie had lunged at me first and I swung in defense, I'd most likely still be sitting in a prison cell now. So, dodgy Thai guy, let's never meet again for your sake, as well as mine. Man on the prowl at a yoga retreat in Thailand. Last year in May 2016, I was at a yoga retreat in Koh Phangan, Thailand. It was a small but well-known yoga and detox center that was located near the water. The main center consisted of a totally open-air restaurant and lounge, which faced the water, and a yoga shala. There were some bamboo hut rooms further to the back of the restaurant. The yoga center and restaurants were complete open to the main road, as there were no doors or gates at the center, meaning anyone could walk through it day or night. It appeared to me that the center must have expanded at some point, because after checking in, as I was being led to my room, rather than going to one of the bamboo huts behind the restaurant, I was led past that, across the main road, which was a small road, by the way, where there was an open area surrounded by forest and trees. In this area, they had built a further strip of connected rooms, probably a 6 to 7 rooms, and mine was the one on the very end. The path that continued past my end room had lots of trees, bushes, natural vegetation, etc. I recall being disappointed that my room was so far from the center, as it really did feel like I was on a separate property, although in reality, it was probably a 5-minute walk. An issue I had with the yoga center was how dark it was at night. There were no lights on the path that led to my room, and I'd feel uncomfortable walking there at night, as I felt very isolated and open. Also, even the main center's open-air restaurant area, it was dimly lit, and the place would be totally deserted after 9 p.m. My first night, I thought I'd hang out in a hammock and listen to the waves crash, but as people left the restaurant area, and I was the only one left in the dark, open space, I felt suddenly very vulnerable. The space was very open, no security guards, and I recall feeling strangely unsafe. I am not wanting to be generally scared or feel unsafe, but I felt it then. I didn't make a big deal out of it, just got out of my hammock and trekked back to my room. However, I did avoid the restaurant area at dark once people had left. As it was a yoga and detox center, most people were in their rooms by 9, so although I didn't go to bed early, there was no open and communal area at the center other than the restaurant for me to hang out in, so I just go to my room. While I would have liked to hang out in the restaurant by the water, it felt too deserted and open at night. On my 3rd night there, I decided to have a cigarette at about 10 p.m. The center was non-smoking, although I did question whether I could smoke outside my room, since it was technically so far from the actual center. But not wanting to break any rules, I walked about 40 feet down the path from my room to smoke. It was while I was smoking that I saw the man to my right. He was a small Thai man, wearing a white shirt, and he was looking at me. I decided to smile at him, and he smiled back. Then he started walking towards me until he was standing next to me. I thought it was odd, but that maybe he was just another friendly local. Although alarm bells were starting to ring, that this was strange. And eventually I said hello in Thai, and he did as well. But beyond that, he didn't speak English, and I don't speak Thai. Until his arrival, I've been staring at the beautiful full moon, so I pointed the moon out to him. After that, I didn't know what other interaction I could have with this man, and thought it was best that I get back to my room. I turned to him and said bye and turned to leave. When I did this, he quickly grabbed my right forearm and placed a strong grip on it. I pulled my arm back, but he held tight as his grip hardened. As I mentioned, this was a small man, and I'm a 5'9" female who weighed probably 165 pounds at the time. Although I've never gone into a fight in my life, I felt that unless this man had a weapon or knew some form of martial arts, I could hold my own. As it dawned on me that this man was not letting me go, and in fact he was gripping my arm in a way no one with good intentions ever would. I knew I had to get out of there before the situation escalated into something I couldn't imagine. I firmly planted my feet on the ground, turned my body, yanked my arm, and started running back to my room. As I was running, I thought, if I run to my room, he'll know where I'm staying. Thankfully, I saw my neighbor, Klaus from Germany, had his lights on still. I started calling, Klaus, Klaus, can you come outside? Klaus opened the door as I got to his room. I stopped running, turned back, but the man was gone. I told Klaus what happened, and he spent some time making sure I was alright before I went to my room. I was a little shaken, but also that perhaps it was nothing. Maybe the guy was just trying to be nice and grab my arm to point out some stars or something like that. I don't know. In the aftermath, I downplayed the significance of it and thought maybe I just made a big deal out of nothing, though I did note not to smoke out there at night. And then 2 days after this incident, I see Klaus in the morning, and he tells me that the man who'd frightened me also scared another woman last night. I was shocked and asked who. He said Tammuz, a beautiful 24-year-old Israeli girl who just arrived. I found Tammuz and asked her what happened. Explaining what had occurred to me, she told me that last night, which was the night after my incident. She had been sitting in the open-air restaurant at around 10, messaging someone on her phone. The place was empty as usual, except for her, a teeny tiny woman who weighed probably 90 pounds. She looked up at one point and saw this Thai man standing kinda hidden in the restaurant watching her carefully. She immediately felt uncomfortable, but went back to her phone. As she did this, she could see him quietly moving closer to her. She said that right away she felt danger and knew she was in an unsafe situation with this man creeping up on her. I asked her what she did. Tammuz told me that she recalled her training from the Israeli army, and when he was about 10 feet from her, she stood up, making herself seem as big as possible. She showed me how she stood straight, shoulders back, chest forward, and arms firmly to her sides, but away from her body. She had a thick glass mug with her at the time, and she held this firmly in her grip. She didn't raise the mug, but made it visible and clear that she would use this thick glass mug, think beer mug, as a weapon, if needed. She said that as she took this stance, she looked directly at him and shouted out, "Stop!" She said the man stood there looking at her for a few seconds as she held her position. Now, she was a tiny woman taking a strong offensive rather than a defensive body posture. In the end, he turned away and walked away. Tammuz quickly gathered her stuff and returned to her room. Like me, she never hung out in the restaurant after dark again, unless others were there as well. Tammuz and I shared descriptions and concluded that it was the same man in both our cases. And then later that same day, the manager of the center came looking for me. She looked very worried as she told me that she had just found out what had happened. She asked me to tell her my story and asked why I hadn't informed the center right away when it happened. I told her the truth, which was that although my gut told me this man was dangerous, my mind also told me that it wasn't really anything, and maybe I was just misinterpreting the situation. Also, I had told Claus in the immediate aftermath and felt comforted that I had a neighbor one wall away. I did tell them, though, that I thought the path to my room needed lights, as it was completely dark at night, and the room being so far away. They ended up installing lights on the path that same day. They also called the police, and we had an undercover policeman posing as a guest at the center for a few days, but nothing happened after that. Well, at least not for the next 7 days I was there. Let's hope it stayed that way since. Almost kidnapped in Bangkok. Not sure if my story is in the right place, but here goes. My mom always made sure my sister and I are well traveled. We've gone to many different countries since we were young and have many great memories. But this one country, every time I think of going back, I get really scared. When I was about 7 years old, we went to Vietnam and Thailand. The local tour guide laid his eyes on me and told my mom to never let me out of her sight, because there were gangs who would snatch kids up, beat them up, and then put them back on the streets to beg for money. Being very young at the time of this, I hated having to be watched all the time, so I kept trying to slip away from my mom all the time. One night in Bangkok, we were walking to a night market. Along the streets were nightclubs, and in front of the nightclubs, there was these menacing-looking bouncers. According to the tour guide, most of the club were owned by gangs. It was a really crowded night, and we had to squeeze past literally hundreds of people. In the midst of everything, my mom lost her grip on me and the crowd swallowed me up. What happened next still lives in my mind. A very large hand clamped itself on my wrist and started to yank me towards a club. I looked up and saw a creepy-looking man smiling down at me. I couldn't even scream. Then suddenly, my mom appears in front of me. She flashed the most evil death glare to the guy, and he immediately pulled his hand back. He patted my head, glared back at my mom, and disappeared into the club. If my mom was a second late, I'm convinced I would have my arms and legs chopped off and made to be a beggar in a foreign country. Mr. Evil Thai Guy, I highly doubt I'd see you again, and I'm really okay with that.